Hi, this is Ren,
This is Casey.
and this is All Walks of Film. Today we're talking about faith.
Cause I got to have a faith. I gotta have faith.
Rest in peace, George Michael.
Oh, you have to bring that up. Sad.
No, we're actually talking about Martin Scorsese's latest film, a 30 years in the making, Silence, based on a Japanese novel of the same name written by Shisaku Endo.
Although just because a movie's been in the making for many years doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. Avatar.
I think the problem with Avatar is more in its story than some of the other elements.
That's 100% what it is, yes.
Yeah, but there's sequences that are great, and the technology obviously pushed things. Yeah. This is probably one of Scorsese's most restrained films as far as visual is concerned.
Yeah, a lot of people were concerned, like, oh, it's gonna be like torture porn. No, it's really not. This isn't really comparable to either The Passion of the Christ or The Last Temptation of Christ. It's not really anything like either one of those movies in any respect, but also definitely not in terms of, like, graphicness.
Yeah, I mean, if you're expecting a movie that, is pretty much all torture, you're not going to get that with this movie. Now, there is torture in the film, and I'm not going to, shy away from the fact that that is an element of the film, that is an element of the book. The book is definitely a lot more brutal than the movie shows. There's a lot of violence and atrocity that is implied rather than explicit in the film. So in the film, two priests, Father Rodriguez and Father Garpe, go to Japan to investigate the apostasy of a missionary priest, a Jesuit missionary priest named Father Ferreira.
Spoiler alert, it's really only about one guy. It's really only about Sebastian, because when I was going to the movie, I thought it was about all three of them. No, it's just the one guy's story.
I read the book before I saw the movie.
So you already knew, but I didn't know.
Yeah. The book is written from a first-person perspective of Father Rodriguez. So you never leave that character in the
Well,
book.
the same thing with the movie, too. He has his internal monologue, and you follow him. But I still thought, I thought that Francisco Garpe, I just know their first names.
Adam Driver?
I'm not calling him by the actor name, dude.
Yeah, no, but he's played by Adam Driver.
Yeah, but I'm not calling him that. I thought Francisco was going to be, a much bigger part, and he leaves really early, and he comes back for a little bit, and that's it. Which made me sad. I think the movie would have been better if there was more of him in it.
Well, it's possible that there was. This movie was actually cut down about 40 minutes, which some people complain that the movie is overlong as is. I honestly think...
Oh my god, we have to talk about that, though.
Yeah, I honestly think that people's attention spans in theaters seem to be decreasing every year. And I gotta say, if you can binge watch a show for 6 hours, you can watch a 3-hour movie.
No, that's completely different. You know why? Well, there's two reasons. One, you have a pause button. That's the biggest thing. It is hard to get through, an hours-long movie in theaters with no intermission. You can't go to the bathroom. You can't take a breather. That is harder.
Well, I do think that some movies should have a 15-minute intermission in between.
I definitely think so. I'm a big advocate for it. Let's bring back intermissions, please.
Yeah, especially when a movie is, pushing, 2.5 hours. Yeah. An intermission would be nice.
I really like The Hateful Eight. This is not a stab at it, but one of the best things about it was that it had an intermission. Oh my god, the relief you feel when you could just take a break for a second and then go back in.
Yeah, but that's only if you saw the 70mm version. The other version did not have that.
Yeah.
So, getting back to the film, this film is a film about faith. And I know that's off-putting to a lot of people. They hear that this is a movie about priests and about faith, and they just go man, it's like one of those like Jesus movies, right? It's like one of those movies about like Christians and their persecution and all that kind of stuff. And I gotta say, yes, but it's good. There's so many of these like bullshit Christian movies that come out like every year, like God's Not Dead and I'm Not Alone or whatever the fuck that thing was.
Well,
about
also,
Columbine.
a lot of people don't like a lot of bigger religious movies like Passion of the Christ.
Well, that's partly because the difference between this movie and movies like Passion of the Christ is like this is about this is separate from, you know, something that's actually like biblically based, even though like Passion of the Christ is...
I understand that, but there is a precedent not just for like, let's have a, you know, a contemporary Christian movie that's trying to like connect with the people. Like it's basically the cinematic equivalent of Christian rock, you know, where like they're trying to be cool, but they suck at it because they don't understand culture at all. But there's also another kind of religious movie that people don't like. That's really preachy, really over the top, very explicitly manipulative of you should think this and you should feel this. You know, and people don't like that either.
One of the criticisms that I saw when addressing this movie, because I did look at some of the reviews, people were complaining that this movie didn't explain things more, that like this movie didn't give answers. And if you understand anything about like intellectual religious thought, you know, like people who are like deeply devout, religion doesn't give you answers. Like if you truly, you know, are somebody of faith, and I come from a religious background, like I personally am not religious, but you know, I grew up in the church and my mom's a minister. And anybody who says that, like, you know, you can just like look in the Bible and get an answer, obviously doesn't have a full grasp on their religion.
Okay, hang on. Before we get into like the reception, let's like actually talk about the movie. I really liked this movie because, unlike movies that are very preachy, very one-sided, this is what you should think of, this is what you should feel. This movie was really interesting about not just having, oh, there's one side and the other side, let's understand both sides. It was actually a lot more dynamic than that, where you had many characters throughout the film, not just major characters, but also some minor characters and whatnot. And they all had, you know, like real life, completely different set of beliefs and viewpoints and philosophies. Because even if, theoretically, I'm not trying to ignite anything, but let's say for, you know, example.
We're talking about religion. We're going to offend somebody.
No, but like, okay, you meet somebody, you're talking over coffee, one of them says, I'm a Democrat. The other one says, I'm a Democrat too. Well, that doesn't mean a lot. Because even though you're on the same side, whatever, that doesn't mean that you guys agree about everything, or that you see politics the same way, or that you believe this action is good and this action isn't good, and this is what people should do and this isn't what people should do. Things are so much more varied than I'm on this side and I'm on this side. And this film was really trying to talk about a multitude of different philosophical ideas, but also in a very understanding way that wasn't painting a caricature of anybody or of a religion or of a philosophy. It was one of those movies where everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
Yeah,
you know,
well, the characters are given three-dimensionality, something that like you rarely see in film, period, but you almost never see in films addressing religion of any kind.
Or
except
politics of any kind, or viewpoints or philosophy.
Except Buddhist films. I have seen some Buddhist films that do address religion in a lot more nuanced way, but I mean that is essentially the nature of Buddhism, and I think that theme bleeds into this because, you know, Buddhism is the opposing religion, though many people would argue that Buddhism is not a religion. That, you know, Buddhism is more of a
philosophy.
Right.
But it was really interesting. The film also did a really good job of having every character have good points and, you know, they had strengths and they had flaws. And every character was very different from all the other characters. Because there were a lot of characters in this movie that were really impactful. I had like 5 favorite characters, you know, out of a cast of however many.
Yeah,
which is really cool.
I like the fact that like each character was fleshed out enough that they were like unique to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So often I watch movies and every character outside of like the main character and possibly the antagonist or a supporting character, just gets lost. Like you're just like, oh yeah, there's like other characters in the movie, but like I don't really remember anything about them.
They're just all fairly interchangeable.
Yeah.
That happens a lot too. And in this film, nobody's really interchangeable, but there's a difference between having constructs that get up on a soapbox and speak their thing when you're talking about a movie that's trying to present philosophical and religious debates. It's so easy to just turn these people into like sound bites in order to push out your argument instead of who are they as people, why do they think this way, what is their motivation, what are their flaws, how do they interact with other people, and how do they move the story along. And this movie does both really well, I think. I think a lot of people who didn't like the movie don't understand how commendable that really is, especially to do it with so many people. At the beginning of the movie, when they come into these Japanese villages, there is a lot of people in the village for a scene. It's a very, very small village. We have basically everyone in the village there talking to each other and talking to the main characters, and that goes on for a little bit. And each one of them is their own person with their own motivation and their own viewpoint and their own idea of how to handle the situation. And I think it is really commendable that the movie does do both extremely well and in a very human way, especially the main character.
Yeah, the characters are unrelentingly human.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian is legitimately stupid. You don't see that often where a character is actually stupid in a well-written way on purpose.
Well, he's stubborn.
He's stubborn, but like the whole thing where, this isn't really a spoiler, but where he's like, I want to meet the instigator. I want to meet Inoue-sama. And they're like, dude, that's him.
Yeah,
legitimately in front of you.
The guy you've been talking to on several occasions.
Yes. And it was, I don't think that was a twist for the audience by any means. I'm pretty sure everyone was following along and knew it was him. Because it was obvious. The movie wasn't hiding it or making it difficult to understand or anything. He was just kind of dumb.
Well, I think in his mindset, he clearly thought that somebody had to be in control of him.
Right.
That there had to have been somebody that was higher than him. Mm-hmm. Because in Europe, that's oftentimes the case.
Right.
You don't see the leader actually going out
and
to see the people. You see, a representative, and then you go back to the castle, and then you talk to this person.
Right.
Or, with the church, you have the priests, then you have the cardinals, and then it goes up the ladder all the way to the Pope.
Right. He also is extremely stubborn. He also doesn't listen very well on purpose.
He's also narcissistic. His image is literally an image trying to make himself one with Christ. He sees himself as as Jesus.
He's also extremely obsessed with the image of Jesus, and he's also obsessed with iconographies. I'm trying not to talk about the reception too much, but I did see like a lot of criticism talking about, this film thinks iconography can replace character or like the actual idea of faith, and it's like, okay, it is helpful to have iconography in a film. You need something visual there, to illustrate your arguments. Film is very show, don't tell. So if you're doing a lot of talking, you have to have something that goes with it, something that physically works with interactions. So I think that was a little ridiculous, but that also is playing into one of his flaws. And I like the fact that the film, when it was Sebastian and Francisco together originally, really painted Sebastian as like kind of the golden boy, like, oh, you're so strong, you're so you're so set in your convictions, you know what the right thing to do is, and clearly Francisco is the weaker of the two. And then that is not the case at all. That is definitely not the case at all. So that dynamic switch worked out, but also, that happens a lot in real life. You meet someone and you're like, wow, you're so cool. I don't really understand how, you can be that great. in whatever respect, and then once you know them for a while, you're like, no, you're human, just like everyone else. The movie was really good about doling that out in little bits, but also in very human ways that weren't exaggerated.
I wanted to get back to what you said about iconography. Iconography works really well on film because, it's an image. It's not a concept, it's an image that's right there. But going on with the whole concept of iconography, for thousands of years, many Christians and other people of other faiths, relied on iconography because most people were illiterate.
Right, exactly.
So having the iconography is important.
Well,
I didn't see a single person with a Bible in this movie.
Right, exactly. And a big part of that is not just illiteracy, historically speaking, but in this particular case, you have the language barrier.
Right, and I did like how, unfortunately, the movie didn't address the fact that these priests were Portuguese well enough.
They did explicitly verbally say it, which was awkward because they're speaking English, talking about how they are speaking in Portuguese. That was extremely weird and awkward throughout the whole film.
Correct, and if it were directed by Mel Gibson, you would get a lot more violence, but you would get the language.
Yeah, and considering how well they handled the Japanese language and the really natural way that was included and worked into the film, I think that this film could have done Portuguese as well in a really good way. I
think it could have. The only thing is that might have alienated audiences too much. I mean,
it's already alienating. Who cares? I know that's terrible, but it's already alienating so many people just based on the fact that it's a religious film, but then also a religious film that is critical, like it's criticizing religion and religious practices. So you're already like doubly controversial there, and you're already flipping off all the people who don't like religious movies and all the people who do like religious movies. So you might as well just go all out and make it a, freaking foreign language film. Why not? The other thing too with the iconography that was really interesting was it works particularly well in this film because the film is all about they can't hear the voice of God. All that's there is silent. There is no tangible God to grasp onto when they struggle, which is why they are feeding into this, I need something physical to hold on to. I need something actually real to remind me and to make me feel comfort and to make me feel convicted in my religion. And I don't see how people miss that, I guess.
Well, especially when you have a scene where he's giving everybody every single religious artifact that he has to the point where he breaks off the rosary and gives people one bead at a time.
Yeah. Which was a really great scene. I really like that. There's so many really great scenes in the movie, too. But it also was a really good experience overall. There's definitely a difference between a movie that has great moments and a movie that is good as a whole.
Yeah, this movie is far superior as a whole than it is in individual parts. And I don't see that a lot in movies, especially nowadays. Like, I see movies that are good in segments, but, like, as a whole, not so much. One of the things I also like is that this movie isn't afraid to be quiet at times.
Yeah. I mean, it is called Silence.
Yeah, the opening of the movie is a black screen with the nature and
the cicadas and all that.
Yeah, all that stuff, and we're not going to get too much into two people in our audience, but yeah, there were some people that were commenting on like the most obvious things in the movie.
I mean, that's obnoxious no matter what, but it's especially obnoxious when like the movie is trying to like create atmosphere of being loud, being quiet, whatever, and you literally just can't engage with it in that way because people are talking through the whole thing. And it wasn't just those two people. We were not with a particularly good audience. It was a fairly big audience considering, but like...
Yeah, and it's a Monday morning.
Yeah, it was a Monday morning. And there were quite a few people there, which at first I thought was cool, but they were talking the whole time. There was rustling around. People were getting up and leaving and coming in and whatever. It was just... there was lots of coughing and sneezing too. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, that I'm a little bit more forgiving of, because if you have to cough, you have to cough. I get it. But, like, it's always frustrating when, like, the audience kind of ruins something.
Yeah, but it's so hard to gauge whether or not you're gonna, like, get that audience. Now, like, usually you can gauge it depending on, like, the location of the theater and, the economic status and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't always,
or the
factor
type of
in.
movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't always mean anything. And also,
I'm sure if you go to some showings of this movie, people be like hooting and hollering and like, acting like they're in church or something.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like it's hard to gauge the appropriate amount of interaction with the movie.
But getting back to the movie itself, one of the things that I was really impressed by was this choice that Scorsese made to make so much of the film shrouded in fog. Mm-hmm. Like, fog had a personality in this film.
Yeah.
Which I don't really see that often in films outside of, like, horror films, which, you could argue to a certain extent this is a horror film.
Not like as a genre film.
Right, not as a genre film, but, like, there are horrific elements to this film, and, they are essentially entering into, a time of horrific experiences.
One of the things I really, 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 really liked about the movie was the movie took place in really gorgeous nature. There was all these, like, great sloping hills and beautiful waves, bright sunshine, lots of flowers, and you could hear insects and birds and that kind of thing. And throughout, like, all of these really beautiful landscapes, there was just horrific acts happening. Horrific human acts happening on top of it, which I really liked because it showed a lot about how they were trying to talk about the practices and not the nature. It's not necessarily like the clashing of faiths that's the problem here. It's the clashing of the persistence of the practice and the indoctrination and trying to convert other people to your way of thinking on both sides. That's more of the issue. I like that the movie didn't try so hard to be like, there were like rainy scenes, but it's not like the whole film was dark and brooding,
Well, that's also because the darkness was their comfort. Since they had to keep their religion secret.
Only at the beginning.
Right.
I'm talking about throughout the entire film.
But, like, a majority of the atrocities that happen in the film happen during daylight.
Broad daylight, yeah, exactly.
So, the nighttime is, in this film, a time of comfort.
Yeah.
And a time of introspection, as well as, a time of community. Going back to, like, the very beginning of the film, I was really impressed that, like, the film captured the communal religious experience in a way that I don't often see in films. A lot of this movie, captured things that I know about Christianity. Growing up in the church and all. But, like, I don't see in films. So many Christian films just pander and, all that kind of stuff. But, it was really interesting to see, like, baptism and, gathering together to have prayers and confession. I just really appreciated the authenticity of that.
Do you want to talk some about, like, the themes and arguments in the movie?
Yeah, we can get into that. This film, unlike most religious films, asks the fundamental question of why even be Christian? Which I think is an amazing question to ask in a Christian film. Mm-hmm. Because so many Christian films make the argument that the only way in life is to be Christian and to confess and, put up your life to God. And this movie says, not here. That will not help you here. So that gives it its own unique experience. But I think that this whole questioning of why in times of trial would you lean on a faith that makes your life miserable? I think that's a question that has been pondered by many people facing atrocities. Most recently, I can think of the Jewish people, during the Holocaust. Like, if you read some of the work of Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor, he had these religious ponderings during the atrocity that he faced. And, many people have written about these, like, during each era of religious oppression. You could say that there are other forms of oppression that, even happen today where people have to, question this. I think this film is very relevant to this time where people feel that they are facing atrocity or about to face atrocity, without getting too political. Some people do have this sense of doom and gloom about the future. I think that Andrew Garfield's character playing a very flawed priest is something that we as a society need to see.
Yeah.
Because so often in film and media and all this kind of stuff, we either get two types of priests. We get the absolute good priest who is, completely devout. He's unflinching. He's just the greatest guy ever. Or we get the rapist.
More often than not, we have the evil priest.
Yeah. So we either get the total hypocrite or we get the total purist. We don't get what I think most priests are, which is really flawed human beings. We're all flawed. We all have challenges. We all experience a crisis of faith, whether that's based on a religious faith or just, trying to understand, why things happen. It's something that it's a universal idea that we all experience. And I think that Scorsese tackling his own Catholicism in this film conveyed that in a really universal way, even though it is explicitly Christian.
It's also really tearing apart the idea of conversion and, to a certain extent, missionary work. How much good are you really doing spreading a practice for a faith that people might not even really sincerely believe? And also, the film did a really good job of bringing this idea in of, like, here are the Christian missionaries. They're coming to Japan to spread religion and Christianity, and they're trying to do good work to give people comfort, to give them their faith, to perform baptisms and make them feel better and do confessions and all these things. But then as the film goes on, their idea of like, the oppressive Japanese government that's not allowing them to be who they want to be and whatever is actually doing the exact same thing that they're doing. They're coming in, they're bringing their own idea and trying to convert people from their way of thinking for the sake of, this is what I think is politically right, therefore this is what you should think is politically right.
They are trying to enforce uniformity.
Right, exactly.
With their culture and society. And to a certain extent, that is a noble cause. Obviously not how...
not how either side was doing it.
Yeah, not how either side is doing it, but, this idea that you want to preserve your culture... because bringing in foreign ideas does destroy, to a certain extent, cultural identity, whether it's for good or not.
Well, culture evolves from mutual sharing and all that kind of stuff. But what I think is really interesting in the film is Sebastian spends so much time trying to be like, no, Christianity is great. You're messing it up. You're tearing it up. You're the reason why this is happening. It's all your fault. You're doing it to these people. It's all on you. But by the end of it, it comes down to, well, also, it's because of you that all these people are suffering. It's because you're taking this action and you're pushing people to do this and to act against their own interests. So it is really interesting that it turns it around that way. But then also, there is this idea of like, is Christianity even... Is being a Christian the best way to be a good person? When he has this conversation with the interpreter, which to my knowledge it's all that he's called is the interpreter, and the interpreter's trying to explain to him why Buddhism can be a better religion or can make a person a better person for being Buddhist rather than Christian, and Sebastian's just like, no, Christianity is the best way. He doesn't really want to hear it. But the way that the interpreter is describing it, it makes a lot more sense. Like, no, Buddhism is giving people something to aspire to. It's giving them this, this motivation to take actual control in their life and to actually act in this way. whereas Christianity is pushing them in all these different directions and is not really encouraging them to be in control or to try to be a better person or whatever. And it's one of those situations where they're both right and they're both wrong.
Right. I think one of the things that, without going too much into the realm of, just strictly talking about religious differences, but I think that based on that argument, Buddhism is a lot more personal, whereas Christianity is a lot more communal.
Yeah.
Which, given how the people were able to, withstand horrible atrocities to the point where, there was a desire of martyrdom with a lot of the people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that having the community gave those people the strength to go through with their martyrdom to a certain extent.
Well, and it also took this idea of martyrdom and also destroyed it and from an ethical standpoint, which I really like too, because on a personal level, I really despise the idea of martyrdom, and it's a pretty prevalent idea throughout tons of cultures and religion all throughout history.
We idealize martyrism so much, these people who, get killed for their religious beliefs, and then it's like, well, what did you do? You died.
Yeah, and also for what purpose, And I like the fact that the film is really deconstructing that idea instead of just being like, oh yeah, martyrdom's cool. I mean, nobody really says, oh yeah, martyrdom's cool, but you understand what I'm saying, where it's like, the film goes from the standpoint of people need their faith so badly that they're willing to go to these lengths, but then also to be like, as a religion and as a person of authority in your religion, that is unacceptable to think that is acceptable. That's not a good way to put it, but you understand what I'm saying. You can't be pushing people to do this to themselves. I think at the end, a lot of the resolution does kind of come down to the best to do is to practice whatever you want to believe, but kind of keep it to yourself. Don't go around enforcing it on other people. There's a difference between sharing and pushing.
Yeah, and to that nature, I'm really curious to see what a more public reception of this film is, because this film is just now getting a wide release. So we haven't gotten a lot of feedback from anybody besides critics as far as this film is concerned. Now, I was really frustrated with how they released this movie because, it was released in December for some people. The critics had all seen it and were talking about it when I was like, dude, I can't even see the movie. Like, what are you talking about?
For weeks.
Yeah, and part of me is like, isn't that in your contract, not to talk about certain movies before they're
it depends.
Release?
No,
okay.
It really depends.
Okay.
Because sometimes movie marketing is leaning on that word of mouth, and sometimes they're trying to stifle that word of mouth.
Yeah, I guess, of course, if the film is bad...
Suicide Squad, you couldn't do that.
Right.
But then some other movies, they actually really needed that.
Like Kubo?
I don't know whether or not Kubo was, allowing people to do that or not.
I think they weren't, which I think was a mistake.
I don't think so.
In the long run. What? Stifling criticism? People actually praising the film.
I don't think that Kubo. I mean, I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure since they were offering advanced screenings of it, because they were only doing surprise screenings of Suicide Squad, and people were not allowed to say what they thought of the movie or talk about any specifics of the movie if they went to go see it. And there were advanced screenings of Kubo, and there was no such requirement or anything like that. So I don't think so. But anyway, it is really frustrating to hear so many people complain about, it's so long, you guys. It's 2.5 hours. It's not that long. It also didn't feel that long, personally.
Yeah, I can watch long movies, but, this movie especially, since,
It was exhausting, but not in a bad way. So many people were just complaining about how long it was, and I think that that's a little ridiculous. I also think some criticism of it being, it's not varied enough in its argument, I think is also kind of ridiculous. It tries really hard to talk from so many different viewpoints in a very convincing way. and in a very not, this is right and this is wrong kind of a way, that I think this idea of like, oh, well, the movie doesn't talk about this enough, or it's too preachy is a little ridiculous.
Well, the notion of the movie being too preachy kind of makes me chuckle, just because it's like, you go into a movie about religion and then you're surprised that it's preachy, you know?
Well, I also think that it's not preachy. And
yeah.
I heard one reviewer say like, oh, this movie is like so critical of the Japanese government, the big bad Japanese, and their way of life is so terrible. And it's like, that's not what the movie was at all.
Yeah,
it was
also,
extremely understanding of very different viewpoints of different people in Japan, too. It wasn't just like, this is the Japanese viewpoint. You know, the movie wasn't really doing that either, which was good. But it also 100% was not trying to be like, bad Japanese, how dare they do these things, you know?
Yeah, well, also, you know, the Shizaku Endo novel is written by a Japanese Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, obviously he's not going to vilify an entire nation
right.
that he belongs to,
mm-hmm.
which I think that it is nice to get books and movies that are from like a different perspective, especially when we have preconceived notions about a group of people. And I mean, let's face it, like for a long time, and this is not to speak illy of the Japanese, but for a long time, the Japanese were an isolated country.
And there is very intense xenophobia in Japanese culture.
Oh yeah, even today. Like, mm-hmm. you know, try to go to any bar or try to go to like any club, you know, whatever, you know, just like walk in, you know, go to the one that has like a Japanese sign, like nothing in English, go to the one with a Japanese sign, try to walk in. I guarantee you will have like one experience where they just go, no gaijin, unless you're Japanese or another type of Asian that could possibly pass for Japanese.
Well, and there's all sorts of stories, like if you look at Miss Japan, that whole controversy was a big deal. I also saw a really interesting video one time where they were talking about how this group of people went into a restaurant and there was one woman in the group who was of Japanese descent, but she grew up in America and she didn't know any Japanese. She wasn't from Japan. And she was there with American descendants who had lived there for many years and could speak Japanese and all that. And their server refused to talk to the people who could speak Japanese and was only talking to the American who couldn't. And she refused to communicate with anyone else. You know, you hear stories about that sometimes. It's not just like Americans or Africans or anything like that. There's also a lot of Southeast Asian xenophobia too.
Yeah, they
which they kind of got into in the movie, where they go to China and there's only one Japanese person.
Right.
in the whole village. You know, they kind of got into that a little bit too, which is interesting.
Well, I don't think that was the only Japanese person. I think that was the only person willing to go with them. I think they explicitly said that. I might have to go back and watch that scene again.
Yeah, I think you might have to go back and watch that scene again.
But,
what do you think about the ending?
So, the ending is different than the novel. In preparation for the film, I read the novel back in 2012, and I was really moved by the novel. But the novel ends on kind of a high note. You know, it's kind of happy. He abandons his faith, and he finds himself at peace, almost. And it's kind of like this uplifting idea that maybe God wants people to be happy. This film doesn't do that, though. This film, you know, has them practicing their religion. Well, not practicing their religion in private, but, you know, they're calling out the other Japanese, and that's in the book. You know, he gets married, he has a wife who, in the film, doesn't have a personality or anything like that. That might have been what was cut. I think it's possible that, like, that portion of the thing, but, like, his wife is character,
mm-hmm.
You know, at near the end, and it, you know, it's this uplifting, you know, idea that, like, you know, he is able to, you know, even though he abandoned his faith, you know, God speaks to people in different ways. Whereas this film, you know, had the notion that wasn't the case.
I kind of thought that the ending was also a little too neat It was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, he's here. He gave up his religion. He's not leaving for some reason, even though he's not happy with the way that he's living either. A couple things happen, and then he dies. Oh, but look, he was secretly Christian the whole time anyway. He didn't lose his faith. Yay. Bye-bye. I was just kind of like, dude, what was that? Like, the whole film was so good, but also what I really liked was the fact that the different chapters of the story, from when they're in the village originally, when they're just working with the common man, to when they're going through their own trials, were just really extensive, really thorough, and then the end was just so lacking in personality or detail.
Yeah, and the original runtime of this movie was, I believe, 3 hours and 15 minutes, which...
That would have been long as fuck. Yeah.
It would have been long as fuck. I would have watched it.
Yeah, me too.
Part of me hopes that that version gets to see the light of day on home video. Wow, I'm saying home video. But you know, hopefully that version gets to see the light of day. Obviously, not for everybody, but part of me is okay with like a more streamlined version and then like an extended version now with stuff like Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman. Like, if you're trying to tell me that the original cut of the movie is the way to watch it, then why the fuck did you release a version that didn't make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, at least this is a cohesive, complete package, you know?
Right.
I think that a big part of the reason why people might not like this film is just because they find religion so alienating. We live kind of in this generation of people who come from a religious background and are not religious. You know, they come from previously religious families and don't practice or don't really believe or whatever. I am deeply agnostic, but I found a lot of the religious elements in the film to be extremely moving. Again, on both sides. I really think that it makes this interesting case of religion can be a good thing if it gives you something to believe in and something to motivate you and give you purpose in your life. But obviously, when you abuse it, it's not a good thing. And I do think that religion does, especially contemporarily, need that criticism. I think that that is extremely necessary because people tend to feel too strongly about the idea of being religious. That if you're religious, you're automatically a bad person or you're automatically a good person, and that's just not the way it works.
Right. And going back to like what I said earlier, I think that like it's important to realize that there is a certain element of people who are faithful. Mm-hmm. I mean, people who do have faith that are extremely narcissistic.
Oh,
like
yeah.
even devout people, you know, can be extremely narcissistic in their faith and feel that like, oh, well, I'm righteous, and like these people, you know, especially that conversation that he has with Father Ferreira, where he's like, well, these people don't even know like what the sun is, you know, like the Son of God. Like they see the Son of God and they look at the sun, the literal sun. And, you know, that's what they see as God.
Well,
they can't like see outside of nature. Like they're very being. They don't understand the personality of Christ and all this kind of stuff. And
they also don't understand the idea of absolution. They have this idea of like the paradise, you know, which is very similar to our modern equivalent of heaven. You know, everything is super awesome, but that's not really what it is. The idea is that when you die, your soul will be salvaged, but you're not having something similar to your mortal experience.
Well, I mean, that is something that's been an issue with Christianity for like a long time, which is, you know, addressing this whole idea that if you ask for forgiveness, you are accepted into heaven. According to some Christians, you could be the best person in the entire world, but if you don't ask for forgiveness, you're going to hell.
Right. Well, everybody has different criteria. And by everybody, I mean different sects and denominations and religions or whatever.
Yeah, it gets confusing really quickly, which denomination believes what. At least for this film, it's simple because it's Catholicism.
Right.
Which is the first large order of the church. It wasn't until Martin Luther came in that, the church started, creating denominations. Granted, there were outside sects always, but, for the most part, it was the church, which was the Holy Roman Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. And this film definitely takes really interesting ideas of what's the best way to be a Christian also, because one of the things I loved the most was that Kichijiro was the best example. At the end of the movie, this guy who's supposed to be this Judas character that Sebastian is struggling to take his confessions and to forgive him for his sins throughout the movie. Like, it just gets harder and harder, and it's also really difficult to watch him struggle, because I thought that Kiji was awesome. I really liked Kiji, and I found him to be really relatable, even though a lot of stuff in his history isn't that gone into, which I liked. We don't need everything spelled out, but his character was really relatable and really understandable. But I was thinking early on, no, he's trying to set an example. Look, he is stepping on the Jesus, whatever, in order to save people's lives. Yeah, the Fume, to save people's lives, because that's more important. He's trying to show people, because there's the whole scene where there's the four of them lined up and he spits on the cross. He's trying to lead people away from this stuff. But since nobody follows him, he just ends up looking like a coward. But then at the end of the film, what Father Ferreira and Sebastian come to realize is that no, your livelihood is important. You can't give up your livelihood for the sake of not stepping on a drawing that somebody made. Like, you can't get but you can't get so wrapped up in this idea that you lose track of the value of your own life. And he talks about how he is weak, and we're supposed to think he's really cowardly, but that's just really not true.
Yeah, well, I mean, the film even goes all the way to the extent to have Jesus talk to Father Sebastian.
Yeah.
I thought that scene was amazing.
I thought that scene was amazing too, and I also liked that it was very Noah, where you could easily make the argument, if you really don't believe in Christianity, you really don't want Jesus to be involved in the movie, that was just his own psyche talking to him, and that's fine. I think it works equally well on both levels. I'm
not sure, but that kind of sounded like the voice of Liam Neeson.
Yeah, it did. I like it when movies do that, like in Moses, when the voice, or in Moses, in Prince of Egypt, where the God's voice was Moses and Zipporah's voices put together.
Yeah, and then in the original Ten Commandments, well, not the original, but the second film that Cecil B. DeMille made, the Ten Commandments, had the voice of God played by Charlton Heston, who also played Moses. Mm-hmm. I am not a religious person. I find religious films to be fascinating. I actually seek them out because there is something fascinating about faith to me. Mm-hmm. Now, to be specific, like I said before, I don't like these fucking faith movies. Christian cash grab movies. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about movies that are made by filmmakers, good established filmmakers, that question faith. Another great example of a film based on faith that really challenges, your understanding is Kim Kuduk's Spring, Summer, Winter, Fall, and Spring. Mm-hmm. It is an amazing Buddhist film that I recommend anybody go out and check out. If you like this film, it takes place in South Korea, but, so it's not, related to this film really in any other way except, the Buddhist thing, but it's great. So overall, I absolutely love this film. Now, it's not without its flaws, especially near the end. There were some differences with the book and the film that I had issue with. I thought the idea of him actually having a cross in his hand was a little too ham-fisted.
Yeah, it was way too neat and pretty.
I think the film was better than that, and I don't know if that was a studio choice or whether that was Scorsese's choice. That seems more like a studio choice. I think Scorsese's better than that, but I don't know.
I was also kind of hoping that the wife had put cross in there?
Apparently I missed it, but I didn't see anything, anybody put anything in his hand.
No, he was holding that himself. But, the scene where the wife took the thing and she put it, in his robe?
Right.
I was hoping there was going to be a cross in there. Or something like that.
Yeah, I just thought it was weird because, you would think that they would have checked.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why that didn't work at all, which is because it just doesn't seem feasible.
Right, because...
It doesn't really seem plausible at all, so...
especially given how important to the Japanese the funeral process is.
Mm-hmm. There's no way that would have happened. If no other reason, they literally changed his clothes. There's no way you could have put his clothes on and missed that he was holding something in his hand. So, unless somebody else put it there, but then that's, a whole interesting part of the story that we didn't get to see, too. So, yeah, I really didn't like that part at all. Yeah, this film is not beyond criticism by any means. It definitely has flaws, and...
It's flawed like its characters. That's one of my favorite things that I heard in another review.
Yeah, well, one line that I really liked was, "This is not a film to be solved or resolved, it's a film to ponder." Which I really like.
I so often get frustrated, especially with modern films like Arrival, that, so many films, just spell things out for you to the point where it's well, why would I watch this again? I got everything that I needed to get out of the movie the first time watching it. So, on second viewing, it would just be because I liked it.
But I didn't like it. Yeah, the film presents a lot of different arguments, but it's also talking about a lot of different subject matter, so it's not doing anything to tell you what to think at all. And in fact, it's a film that's really pushing for more understanding, which I really like. You don't have to agree with everything, but you should try harder to understand, and I like that. But like I was saying, it's not like it's beyond criticism. I just think a lot of the criticism is undeserved in this particular case.
I think especially with religious films, people come in with their arms folded. And, in a sense, that's unfortunate, but I get it.
Yeah, that's really what I think it is. It's just, you can't help how you feel about a movie. And if you don't connect to it for some reason, not just because it's religious. I'm not religious at all. I don't really find faith that interesting. I don't find religion that interesting. And I was really moved by a lot of the movie. But if you just don't have a personal connection with it, that's fine. But that's also not criticism of the movie. That's not a problem with the movie. It's also not a problem with you. You guys just aren't compatible. That happens. There are a lot of movies that I'm like, oh, that's a great movie. I don't really like it. That's fine.
I can't recall a movie like that for myself that I could appreciate, as a really good movie that I didn't like.
Well, just because I didn't like doesn't mean I disliked it. You understand?
Yeah. What movie are we talking about now?
Any given movie.
Okay.
An example is, The Searchers. The Searchers is definitely a great movie. I don't like it. I don't dislike it by any means. It's just not my cup of tea. I didn't really get something out of the movie, and that's fine. That's not a flaw with the movie of, you didn't appeal to me personally. No, that's ridiculous. So I just think that happens sometimes with movies, and I think that's why sometimes people don't really know how to criticize a movie, because they think if they didn't like it, that must mean that there's something bad with, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, but
that's not really true, though.
I do think it's important to be objective. Now, one thing that we haven't mentioned that I will be remiss if I do not mention is, good God, was the production design and the costumes design absolutely fucking amazing in this movie. There was an attention to detail, especially in the costuming, that I don't even see in Japanese films. And it's probably because they had 30 years to work on it. But, it was down to how the katanas looked. They had 3 blades with them so often. You sometimes see 3 blades, but you don't always see 3 blades. And if you know anything about samurai, they always had 3 blades. One was for harakiri, and one was a backup blade, and one was their primary blade, correct? Mm-hmm. Is that... Yeah. Also, each character had a different kimono. there were so many different intricate kimonos. And then there was, the kimono of the poor people, which, had a lot more weavings and it was I was just really impressed with that. I will be incredibly frustrated if this movie does not get nominated for its costuming and production design. Also, hair and makeup. The hair and makeup in this movie is incredible, especially with the samurai, because those kind of haircuts are like not easy to do. Like there's a whole thing that goes with that, and like the top knots that they had.
That's what they're called, yes.
I mean, I was just really amazed because like I haven't seen one that detailed in a film. Like I might be missing something, but like that seemed like completely accurate. Mm-hmm. Based on like what I've researched versus, other films where you take some artistic liberties, but this film seemed to be slavishly paying attention to historical detail. Down to the houses that the people had. How many times have you watched a film where wood has rain damage? Because obviously they wouldn't have preservatives to, protect the wood from, the rain damage that would come. And, as I mentioned that, I do want to say that it is unfortunate that 6 people died making the set.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was back in 2012, I believe. Wow. So, yeah, overall, I thought the movie was amazing, flawed, and even though we spoiled the movie in our review, if you haven't seen it,
oh yeah, we did.
I would highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
And let us know what you think of the movie. I know that this movie will have very polarizing views of it. I'll be really interested to talk to people about the film. All right, well, thanks for listening.